So we are, today I want to talk about the whole, sort of a big picture, the issue of Tolkien's so-called Legendarium, which is the whole corpus of Tolkien's mythopoeic writing. That's the background for The Lord of the Rings. And I also want to talk about how we are to read The Lord of the Rings, because most Christians read it as allegory, I think, in some form. And but Tolkien explicitly says that it's not allegorical. So there we have a conundrum. And so I want to look at that issue and sort of the worldview type. How are we to read this the way Tolkien wanted us to read it at any rate? How did he see it himself? That's going to be what we're going to discuss today, unless other questions arise, which I welcome. But as I say, the Legendarium, so-called, is the mythopoeic writing that forms the whole background to The Lord of the Rings. And there's a lot there. It's something like 50 years of adult life that constitutes this work. And if you want to say 50 years, that's until his death. His works have been published subsequently, even to this day. They're still being published by his son, Christopher Tolkien. So they were written during those years, but they continue to come out, and they're quite good, actually. Children of Húrin and Luthien and Berian and so forth. Great stuff. But the one I'm going to talk about primarily is the Silmarillion, which is the most important of them. It's the Ur-myth, if you will. I should make a comment on this word legendarium in case. I mean, it's obviously an unusual term. It's used by Tolkien scholars. Reference to the book of medieval category referring to the lives of the saints are called legends. Now, the word legend in contemporary English, well, let me ask you, when I use the word legend, what's the connotation that springs to mind? Okay. By myth, you mean?
Not true in history.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost, almost a synonym. A myth is something not true. A legend's not something true. A myth is a legend. And how do we disambiguate the two terms? I don't know. Most people don't really. Myths are legends, legends are myths. Jaden, did you have something?
The idea within one of the two terms that it could be true, but it most likely isn't. Like, holds just that little aspect of this could be a true story, but we're not sure.
Yeah, so I think there is an aspect of, and Jordan Peterson's making this a more popular view than it has been for a little while at any rate, that there's something that is primally true within the stories, a sort of something basically true about human experience in a myth or a legend, perhaps. So it's got not only a kernel of true, maybe even more than that. So these are archetypes, would the term be the term used. It was very common, the most important scholar that proposed this view was Northrop Frye, Canadian scholar. At Victoria College, I had the privilege of hearing him before he passed away when I was an undergrad at University of Western Ontario. But he was at Victoria College here at U of T for decades, and he was Canada's foremost literary critic, and his work is still worth reading, and he writes, I'll talk about this next semester, when I come to the Bible as literature. He wrote a couple of works on the Bible as literature and largely reads it archetypally, according to the categories of Carl Jung. So these are true to human experience and general natural pattern. And Jordan Peterson, it seems to me, when he reads the Bible, he reads it in this Jungian way. So he thinks it is true in a certain respect, and in that, he now seems like radical. But in Jung's day and in Frye's day, Frye would not be what we would regard as a conservative theologian. he was a literary scholar, romantics scholar, and so forth. But the fact that he holds there to be some truth there, which is not negotiable, not subject to social construction, in our day where everything's a social construct, it sounds like a really radical position. It's just interesting to see how much the scholarly community has moved to the point where Jordan Peterson sounds like he's saying something, ultra conservative, and whereas really what he's doing is simply repeating the consensus of liberal scholarship until not that long ago. So that's the interesting. But that's a legend, actually. So I asked you what you thought a legend was, and you said it's a myth, and by that it's something not true. But that is not the origin of the term, and actually if you know your Latin, you'll know that END terms in Latin are gerunds, and they are to be something that you have to do. In this case, it's something to be read. On your maps in geography class, there's a legend at the bottom. The legend will give you something that you have to read in order to interpret the map, because the map has certain symbols on it. So there's a legend. You have to read this. This is to be read before you try and look at the map. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense to you. But in its origin, medieval Latin, it referred to the lives of the saints. And by the saints is meant the particular Christian individuals whose lives were exemplary, performed some form of miraculous deed, and were thereby canonized by the Church Catholic. A surviving example is the Andrew Legendarium, but there's a whole range of legends. Now, these are not. So then the question comes: if we regard a legend as something that is made up or a myth, then do we really have to read this? And the answer is no. I mean, nobody has to do something if it's merely a myth any more than you have to baptize and have the Lord's Supper if they're merely symbols, because it's just something that we do. There's no truth content in it. There's no purpose to it other than this is something that we do. You just wouldn't do it. Yes?
So would the Silmarillion be sort of a legend to the Lord of the Rings trilogy? That if you read it, you have a better understanding of what's actually going on?
Yes. Yeah, but the Legendarium, as is going to be used by me and Tolkien scholars, refers to the whole corpus of works, including the Lord of the Rings. But they tend to be the background to it. The Lord of the Rings is the most contemporary of the tales. So you'll know that The Hobbit deals with an instance of the life of Bilbo Baggins. And that precedes this. So in a sense, that's part of the Legendarium as well. But actually, it's a pretty contemporary one and not so important. I mean, it's important for Frodo, but it's not really important in terms of where did Sauron come from, and who is Gandalf? What sort of creature is this? And we've got elves and men and dwarves and others, and who are these characters? And there seems to be there's a backstory here of animosity and friendship, and we hear bits of it in Lord of the Rings, but there's a sense that there's a deeper story that we have not yet heard, and that those stories are in some of Tolkien's other works that he was working on before The Lord of the Rings, actually, but published after. Yes?
But isn't it definitely integral because it explains how the ring came to the Shire to begin with? How the ring came to be?
You mean Bilbo?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Because if we didn't have the story of Bilbo, the ring wouldn't be in the Shire.
Yes, but then it begs the question, where did the ring come from, and why does it possess the power that it does, and how is it linked to Sauron, and who is Sauron? And he is alongside, apparently he's one of the Istari, or wizards that went dark, as it were, just like Gandalf and Saruman. He's one of those figures, but he seems to be more powerful. Where's the backstory to that? It's not in the Lord of the Rings. It's just, this is a fact. He is this. Okay, we deal with him as he is, but how did this come about? is he the essence of wickedness? If he is, then his destruction at the in the third installment, the Return of the King, would suggest that evil's been destroyed. But we see that that is not the case. So you do sort of need the Legendarium in order to properly understand the Lord of the Rings. So in that sense, this is to be read. I didn't put it on the syllabus because the syllabus is already prohibitive enough in terms of its breadth of reading. I get that. And that's the purpose of the lecture, is to fill in that a little bit. And obviously you can go back and read the Silmarillion at a later stage. If this had been only a course on Tolkien, I would have put those works on. But I wanted to do Lewis and Tolkien and talk about their common approach. And not just a Tolkien course. But really, if you're going to do Tolkien proper, then you would have to do the Silmarillion. So it is something to be read, and in the church's understanding, the lives of the saints are to be read because these are people just like you and me who have not seen the Lord Jesus in person, unlike the apostles. They haven't seen him, they haven't walked the earth at the same time as him. They have been given the Holy Spirit, and they lived particularly exemplary lives, and they are encouraging to people who have similar walks. So there'll be a saint that will be particularly for plumbers or carpenters or sailors or whatever, because, well, that's my profession. Then I look to his life, and here's how I'm to act in this. Here's, we're to do what Jesus does or walk as Jesus would, but Jesus never walked as a sailor. Like, that wasn't his vocation, but this man who was a Christian was, so we look at this, right? That sort of thing. So these are to be read. These are examples, and so necessary, and in some ways more popular than Scripture in the Middle Ages. As such. There are saints' days and so forth, which remain in the European calendar, are being removed, but certainly are there. But here it's not a reference to the saintliness of it or the sanctification of these lives, but simply that they're necessary back reading. Okay? Yes?
I think I'm tracking with you. So you're saying that before Shelob, there was Ungoliant.
Right.
Before Sauron, there was Morgoth.
Right.
So you need to be acquainted with that backstory to help understand the characters of Shelob and Sauron.
Well, also, again, Sauron is going to be defeated. If he were the embodiment of evil, which he is in his day in some ways, or he's the most evil of all the evil characters, then it would suggest that evil had been destroyed, but it isn't. And evil is something that's far more deeply rooted and problematic than simply its manifestation in Sauron. And it's something that cannot be ultimately vanquished, according to Gandalf. Gandalf says that we cannot ultimately win against the powers of darkness. It's a pretty gloomy picture. But we might be able to do it here. But ultimately we can't. So this is the eucatastrophic dimension. There's an element of the long, slow defeat, which is he probably picks up from the Norse sagas, where everything is going to end in this Götterdämmerung, this twilight of the gods, where everything comes down in a glorious crashing defeat and ruin, a fight to the end in which we ultimately lose. So that sense of doom and gloom is there. It's strong. It just doesn't happen in the Lord of the Rings, but that means that it's going to come worse in later manifestations, because now, if you think about the Lord of the Rings, now we no longer have Gandalf. He's gone. Aragorn is a man and he's mortal. The elves are going to leave as well. But evil's going to remain, and the most potent adversaries of evil are leaving Middle-earth. What's going to happen next? We don't know, but we can imagine. Anyway, so the text can be read on its own. It's compelling, and it's attractive, but it begs various questions, or at least the deep questions, which the book itself can't answer. Okay? So this Legendarium, now Tolkien himself uses this word with reference to his works in letters that he wrote between 1951 and 1955 when he's trying to finish the Silmarillion. So it's Tolkien's own word. In a letter to Milton Waldman in 1951, writing about the Silmarillion, he says, "This Legendarium ends with a vision of the end of the world, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Silmarilli, and the light before the sun." That's how it will all end. The Silmarilli will be recovered. But that's the future. On my texts, my Legendarium, especially the downfall of Numenor, which lies immediately behind the Lord of the Rings, is based on my view, and I quote, that men are essentially mortal and must not try to become immortal in the flesh. End quote. Letter of 1954. They must not try to become immortal. Now, when you think about the contemporary context of transhumanism and the goal of gaining immortality, which is part of the eugenics movement as well, in its earliest inceptions, not just ridding us of diseases, but perfecting human nature so that we don't die. It's a contemporary comment. In a letter of 1954, and writing specifically about the Silmarillion, actually, in the imagination of this story, we are now living on a physically round Earth. But the whole Legendarium contains a transition from a flat world to a globe. There's a transition there. Don't ask me why. Exactly. Other than that, people at one stage believed it to be so, and eventually discovered that it was impossible. It was always, the globe was round. It's been known, by the way, for many, many millennia that the world is round and not flat. It's reviving, by the way, this idea that the Earth is flat. This is extraordinary. It's partly just because of the distrust of the public narrative on certain other points. So now everything's being questioned, however absurd. So it will include a wide variety of works, and these are phases of Tolkien's elven writings. So there's the Quenta Silmarillion, there's the Book of Lost Tales, etc., etc. The Silmarillion is the most important one, by the way. So one final comment on that before I move on. The Legendarium are not to be seen like fictional universes, made up things that didn't exist. They are meant to be true history. So we'll come to the Silmarillion in a minute. At first, it's almost a private project for him. He's a scholar and a bit of a geek. I don't think that's a term of abuse these days, but maybe it is. I don't know. I don't mean it that way. He's very interested in the world that he's created. Well, what's the cosmology like in this world? The Silmarillion explains it. What's the theological scope of this? There's no God mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, but there's a sense of a purposive universe behind it. How did that come about? The stories, the ancient stories of previous generations, for Tolkien are obviously hugely important as a scholar and a medievalist. What are those stories? So he's interested in tracing them out, and he's almost for his own edification. He's not really interested, or if he is interested in publishing it, no publisher is interested in it. Until he publishes The Lord of the Rings, and they said, you know what? There's a huge market for this. How about that Silmarillion thing? How about you publish that? It's actually the first work he started working on. So in 1914, before he went off to war, he worked on stories that would form the backdrop of the Silmarillion. They were intended, by the way, to become a part of an English mythology that would explain the origins of English history and culture. Isn't that interesting? No. So he sees no divide between the world that he is creating and English history. Historians would go nuts. The divide between observable fact and fiction it doesn't even exist there, almost. Although it does in Tolkien's mind. But it would have to be, but I'll get into that as we get into it. But he doesn't, when he's trying to invent, or when I say invent, recover the origin and the truths that must underlie the fracturing of the truth that follows thereafter. It's tracing it to their roots. In the same way as a scholar, he's interested in etymology. He wants to get to the roots of words. He wants to get to the roots of history. But I'll talk about that in a minute. Comment or questions? So as I say, he wrote the Silmarillion after the success of The Lord of the Rings. Yes?
Why do you think he dropped
Or
the
finished.
idea of making it the origin for England? Like, why did that change?
For the same reason that often is the case with many writers. It's hard to explain in a way, but writers will say that the characters that they create take on a life of their own, and then it's almost like the writer is waiting for the character and the world that they've created to unfold before they know where the story's going or what the backstory is. So they don't, when you're writing, there are probably two ways of going about it. I'm sure there are more, but you could have a big picture, like draw it on a whiteboard. Here's what happened and when, and a big chronology, and lay it all out in advance, and now let me write a story that'll fit into it. Or you can write about a character, one character, and from that they encounter other characters, and you don't even know the significance of those characters. In fact, that is actually part of Tolkien's story with The Hobbit. He didn't even know the importance of the ring in The Hobbit when he wrote it. It was just a ring. It was obviously a magical ring, but it's not the one ring of power. It became that. He didn't know it at the time. Rings are important in the stories of hobbits and so forth. Not that they're called hobbits. But golems. Golems are medieval things. And lots of interest in riddles and rings in medieval tales. So this is just a ring, and it's a magical ring of some sort. And it has a certain effect, but he doesn't connect it to what it eventually becomes. That unfolds as time goes by. It becomes clear to him. That's how he explains it, whatever you make of it. I think that those of us who are not mythopoeic in our imagination regard that a little bit skeptically. But I don't have any reason to doubt him. And other writers I've certainly read talk about the same process of creation. So for instance, Charles Dickens, his novels were serialized. They appeared chapter by chapter in the equivalent of newspapers, and he would write them week by week, and he wouldn't know where they were going. He was paid by the line, and he always ended on a cliffhanger, because you're going to come back next week and read what's going to happen next, and he's wondering what's going to happen next. So he'll introduce, if you read Dickens, there's a lot of characters. You have your main character, but then you introduce a character, the character is very lively and disappears. Gone for 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 chapters, and then pops up again. And suddenly this character is not just accidental, it's a very important character, but he didn't know it when he wrote it. So that's his account of it. Many writers speak of that. It's helpful if you're experiencing writer's block to know that you don't have to have it all worked out. Just start writing. And then sometimes you figure it out as you go along. You don't have the luxury of that with essays in terms of time. right? I know what I'm going to do, sit down and write it. My problem always when I wrote essays is once I got into writing, I thought, actually, I don't want to write about that. I thought that was it, but the issue is really that, so I have to tear it all up and start over again. That's why I handed my essays in late all the time, which you're not allowed to do. Actually, you are. Just, I didn't say it. Actually, I have to edit that, don't I? No, I want you to think through things, and thinking through things sometimes leads you to things that you didn't expect in advance. That's part of the process of learning on the essay. So the Silmarillion is there, and in the Silmarillion we get the account of the origin of all things right at the outset. I'm not going to spend the whole class talking about that, but it is a creation through a being called Iluvatar. First 17 pages are the account of Iluvatar's creation and continued support of the world that he has created. And he creates it, by the way, by song, by singing. Yes?
Did he steal that from the magician's nephew, or
No.
did the magician's nephew steal that from him?
Well, stealing is a strong word.
Did they borrow that? Like, I know they borrow from each other, but that specifically?
The better question is why is Iluvatar singing? So you note the similarity. Why is he singing? First of all, it's a he, which is also interesting. But he's singing. Why singing? Because in the Bible, we're not told that God sings the creation into being, that he speaks it. But here we have singing. Why do Christians sing, by the way? Maybe there's a good question for you. Why do we sing? Because I hear people sing and they can't sing. So why do they sing? Why are we told to sing? Most people can't sing. If they really do it passionately, then they put them on stage and they still can't sing. That was really nasty. And not true either. Most people can't sing. But yes?
Because God says he make a joyful noise for him. So like regardless of whether you are good at singing, if there is joy in your song, then it's
So you can't sing songs that aren't joyful. So what do we do with the Psalms of Lament? Which are songs. I'm not disputing what you're saying, by the way. It does say that in Scripture. But does make a joyful noise then preclude the songs of lament and the imprecatory songs, which are talking about striking down the enemies of Israel? They're songs. They're the psalms that are sung by the nation of Israel, but they're not. Are they joyful?
Does joy not necessarily mean happiness?
It does not. No, it does not. That's first point, an important point. It does it in contemporary worship. It always means happy. Okay, so that's a problem with contemporary worship. But that's not the issue of why we sing at all. That's right. But contemporary singing almost invariably invokes or enthuses us to be happy. Doesn't work very well if something dreadful has happened to us or family or so forth. Does that mean we feel like we're going to be a phony? I have to be a happy person to be a Christian, or God won't accept my, it's a big issue. Anyway, did you want to address the original question or just make a comment? Okay, please.
I want to say I think music has a lot of power. It can change the way people think. It can arise emotion in them. And I think
that's not good. Is that good?
It can be used for good or bad, definitely.
Correct. So a background to this. It can be for good or bad, right? All our emotions are not good. Okay, so behind both men's thought here, will be the Christian tradition and not just what Scripture says about this. There is musical accompaniment. We know that the Psalms were sung, and they were sung with musical accompaniment as well. But furthermore, that music was wedded into the cosmos. This is from the writings by, and I've said this in my Milton's class, Boethius, on tractate on music. And he thinks that there are three types of music. There's the musica mundana, the musica humana, and the musica instrumenta. So, brief explanation. The musica mundana is the music that is wedded into the fabric of the cosmos. It's in the music of the spheres, that doctrine which is wedded to Ptolemaic cosmology. But then it begs the question, well, why come up with such a odd theory? Because further, they say that the music of the spheres is inaudible. Well, if it's inaudible, then why on earth would you come up with such a fictive idea? It's absurd. So there's a music there. It's really there. You just can't hear it. It's like, you mean the dwarf on my chair? You mean that, like that? Yeah, it's that absurd. No, it's not that absurd. Why do they think that there's music wedded into the cosmos? Because they can observe harmony. Mathematically, they can note that the musical scale is mathematical precision. Mathematics holds true because physics depends on it. All observable science depends on there being things that there are certain truths that are necessary for things to have order. And not only do they have a mathematical order, we observe that in the musical scale there's a harmony to the notes put together. You can create other music out of it. So there's a beauty, and we all observe that there is beauty in the world. Nobody disputes it. We also observe, although some in our day dispute it, that there is truth that can't be contradicted. Although, actually, believe it or not, there are people that don't agree that 2 + 2 = 4. The Western tradition will uphold it. The Eastern tradition would deny it, historically. Indian music does not work on the same principles of logic as the Western, by the way. They have a different musical scale as well. If it sounds a little bit funky, it's because they don't have the 8 notes. They've got 5, I believe. But this music is interwoven into the fabric of all things, and it doesn't suggest that only an order, but a harmony. That's the important thing. There's a goodness wedded to the truth, and there's a beauty wedded to it. And it's in all things. Everything that's been created. It's a consequence of God's own nature. He is good. Every Christian will affirm that. He is true. Again, every Christian will also affirm that. He's the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus. But he's also beautiful. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings peace. Who is that? It's, again, God. So he is the unity of beauty, truth, and goodness. And the product of his work, namely creation, bears the marks of beauty, truth, and goodness, and they're united. So they're united in this inaudible music in the cosmos, which is also in all things. They also affect the musica humana. What does that mean? That means there's a harmony within the human frame that responds and intuitively understands and reacts to that music that we can't hear. So if you hear beautiful music, it soothes your spirit. There's musical therapy in our day, built on this idea. Our psychologists and scientists will observe the demonstrable consequence of certain types of music on child development. They'll also observe that discord And when I say discord, I don't only mean fighting at home or conflict in the world, but music that's off key affects people strongly. Plato in his Laws says that if you want to destroy a nation, you introduce bad music. You want to corrupt them. Strong stuff. And it will work. The reason it will work is because music affects our passions, and our passions will overthrow our reason. Because the passions are powerful, and they will usurp the place of reason. And then our sense of goodness will get corrupted as well. So if you want to wreck a culture, rather than beautiful music, play hideous, ugly music. Sounds of discord, disharmony, atonal. In the 20th century, there's a movement called atonality, so it doesn't have any harmony anymore. John Cage and so forth, but lots of others. So there's a music within the human breast that corresponds to that. So the beauty of, so when we enter and we hear beautiful music, we feel there's a sort of a calmness within us, and it's created by the fact that we have the same creator as the cosmos. And this can be replicated through the musica instrumenta, which will range everything from the instrument of our voices to musical instruments. So the musica instrumenta corresponds to this, and it has an effect on this. This is why we play music. It's asserting a beautiful, good truth in accompanying everything. It's one of the hallmarks of Christendom, the musical inheritance. In the 1960s, it got overthrown. We still use the musical scale, but only a few chords, a certain type and so forth. But that's off topic. That's why there's a song there. It's because it's a Christian tradition. So in a sense, it's not disagreeing with the biblical account. It's almost like a midrash, a commentary on it. When the word was spoken, it was a harmonious word. Needs to be said, because in our sense, words are not always harmonious. In this case, it is. And Melkor, when he comes to speak, introduces discord. He wants to sing his own song. Yes?
Could there be a very small amount of proof maybe that there was music involved in the biblical account of creation? I'm
Yes.
thinking of the verse in Job that when God says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" And the morning stars sang together and the angels shouted for joy.
Yep. In fact, that would be a very good proof text if you were looking for proof text. Yep. And if you, it's there in Milton as well. There's singing that accompanies it, but the emphasis is on in the biblical account is on the verbal aspect of it, because you can sing without words. You just make noises, right, that are inarticulate. The importance of words is that it's articulate sound. It points to, articulus is your index finger, it points to something. It identifies it. It says it's this, not that. That's why singing includes words that need to be true words and not false words. Beauty has to be wedded to truth and promote a moral life. And by the way, ugliness discourages a moral life. So the embrace of ugliness in our culture is, for me, an extremely alarming sign. But that's why he does it. So Iluvatar so the world is sung into being, and the singing continues. It's an ongoing song. And that is biblical, I think. In the new heaven and the new earth, we're told they will be singing. And what is the song, by the way? You remember the book of Revelation? What's the song they'll be singing? It's not one song, by the way. It's the song of Moses and of the Lamb. So all of those that align with God's redemptive work that song that's being sung. So there, he accomplishes this, his will, Iluvatar does, by way of intermediaries. We would call them angels. Tolkien calls them the Valar and Maiar. Now the Valar are explicitly mentioned in the Lord of the Rings. The Maiar are not. The Maiar are beings like Gandalf. So if you think, what is Gandalf? He's called a wizard, but he's more than a wizard. That's what he's called. That's what the creatures of Middle-earth call him. He's not that. Exactly. This is a universe, by the way, that is in which there is freedom. There's no coercion. Also important to Tolkien, the free and voluntary service or praise is essential to the unfallen universe. Coercion is the mark of the rebels. Same in Tolkien, same in Milton, for that matter. Yes?
What about the elves who were stolen from the good and the pure and corrupted to make the first orcs?
Yep.
That was against their will, wasn't it?
Against their will? They were deceived, you mean?
Yeah.
Or lured by their wickedness. Right? To rebel? Yeah, so one of the things about the elves is the way they're so noble and beautiful and powerful in the Lord of the Rings that you might be tempted to think that they're unfallen beings. They seem to just be better than the other creatures at everything. But that's, again, if you get into the Legendarium and into the Silmarillion, it's clear that the elves are just as fallen as the other creatures, including the most important ones in Middle-earth. Galadriel, she too is marked by this corruption, and she has a test that she has to pass, which is, will she take the Lord of the Ring, or the ring of power, which is offered to her offered freely without coercion. And she notes that you offered it to me freely. I've greatly desired this, but you offered it freely. So I can take it. And now it's just, what would I do with this? And then her imagination runs wild there. I could be beautiful and have great power. She decides she will not use that, and she will retreat and become merely Galadriel and retreat into the west. She will not. She resists the temptation just as Gandalf does. But this is a genuine temptation. It was part of her original rebellion. She's learned from this. Because in there is a possibility of a rebellion against Eru. Eru is the god. Iluvatar is probably the equivalent of Christ. Eru is probably the equivalent of God the Father, if there are exact equivalents. Again, Tolkien's going to reject the idea of that this is an allegory. I'll get to that. So I hesitate to say that, but there's at least an application. Let's say it that way. A seeming application, if not an exact correspondence. There are Valar and there are even Maiar who reject his rule, the rule of Eru. And they introduce dissonance, discord into the cosmos. So there is we would say, a rebellion amongst the great powers. In the same way that Satan and his rebel angels rebel against God before the creation of human beings. That's Satan pre-exists Adam and Eve. And we're told there's a rebellion in heaven, and a third of the angels revolt against God. Milton embellishes upon this in Paradise Lost. But here's the backstory to that. But the dissonance that they introduce into this world, while real, cannot put down or silence the underlying harmony. So the world is still good. It's just marked by, it is contradicted by discord and by the growing contagion caused by that discord. And interestingly, Iluvatar just lets it go. He doesn't try and suppress it. He lets it happen. The same thing Milton will note that the Lord does in his Paradise Lost. He lets Satan do his wicked deeds, even though he foresees what will come of it. So he doesn't coerce. Note that he never coerces. God is not coercive. Draws people to him. Loves them. He dies for them. Doesn't compel. Or if he compels, it's not the sort of compulsion that you, in which your free will is totally crushed in the process. So the Iluvatar works and redeems the world by the workings of what we would call providence. Lewis talks about it in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in terms of the law that's older than the law that the witch knew. If she'd read that one, she would have known that there's an even older law that can break the discord and the rules that govern the world, if there's a willing sacrifice, etc. So it's there. Now, this cosmos is also hierarchical. Final point before I move on. It's very complex. It stretches all the way down from Iluvatar down to the beings that are seemingly powerful and pulling the strings, down to the elves and dwarves and men and orcs. And then there are old creatures like the Ents, but these are just small creatures. And then there's this curious figure of Tom Bombadil, which we'll have to address, who doesn't fit any of those categories. People don't even know what to make of Tom Bombadil. I think I have an idea, but we'll talk about that. But he doesn't seem to fit those sorts of things. But there's a hierarchy, and it even goes down to the materials that they use, such as the mithril and the gold and the wood. These have and the lembas bread and the elven coats and so forth. These substances also seem to be imbued with some sort of power. They're not just inert. They fit with this harmonious universe, and in some ways they can bring it about. It's not a fixed order, by the way, but there is a hierarchy there, and it can change because there is freedom within it. So there's freedom for good characters to become great characters, and for good characters to become wicked characters. That is a choice that lies before them, like Boromir, who was a great man, and unfortunately gives in to the power of the ring. But before he dies, he repents, and so he's a great man because he repented, even though he rebelled, like he fell. It's a great illustration, because you think Boromir, he's called by the other characters, including Aragorn, the mighty man, and he's revered for what he did, but you're thinking, but you've just broken the fellowship, right? A terrible failure. Well, it's the terrible failure in the same way that Adam's failure is a terrible one, but his repentance is the model for Paradise Lost for us. So again, you can fall, but you can also be restored from that if repentance is there. And he does repent. So he remains great, because that's his personal battle. So that's an interesting thing, actually. Within this, there's an element of the grand picture, the great war against the ring, in which all races participate, and on which so much seems to hang. But the most important thing is there is an internal battle going on within each character, and that is the most important battle. Where will they line up? Will they be with Iluvatar, or will they be against him? The ring corrupts all, including Frodo, the ring bearer. No one is going to complete the quest. So there are no models of heroism that are not tarnished in The Lord of the Rings. And that includes Aragorn, it includes Gandalf. They all have their weaknesses. Comments, questions? Okay, well then, oh yes.
I'm fascinated by your discourse on the importance of music.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it?
I was thinking of something Dr. Peter Kraft, for the benefit of my classmates, professor of philosophy at Boston College, one of the finest Christian theologians in the world.
Yeah.
In his lectures, he keeps making mention of the fact that 3 of his friends who were atheists came to Christ because of the music of Bach.
That's very interesting.
Each of them said because there
He
was
obviously
Bach,
has a very interesting group of friends, right?
he said because there is Bach, there must be a God.
Yeah. Yeah, not many of our group of friends necessarily agree to that. But yeah, Bach being a Christian and wedding Trinitarian themes into his music, there's good work written on that, by the way, by theologians these days. And I do believe that music has an effective power to present truth in the same way that story has an effective power to present truth, but it weds it with words. That's why I think of all the arts, the most important one is the one I teach, literature, because it includes the music and it includes the philosophical truths and so forth. It's called rhetoric. What we teach actually would historically be called rhetoric. I'm actually a teacher of rhetoric, not just literature. But there you go. Yes?
I'm interested in just something you mentioned, which was like even Gandalf was fallen. As a member of the Istari, in terms of how it works, isn't he basically a minor angel? And isn't it more of a temptation rather than like a fallenness displayed in him?
Let's wait. Let's put the question on hold, but it's a good question. It wouldn't tempt him if he wasn't fallen. That's the answer.
Eve was tempted before she was fallen.
She wasn't.
Jesus was able to be tempted.
No, not in the same way. But we can talk about that. He experienced all of the acts of the devil that would tempt anyone, but he wasn't actually. He didn't desire anything evil.
So in the way that the Hebrew word for tested, tempt is the exact same. So
Yeah.
you're saying Jesus was tested, not tempted.
Yes. But for clarification, tempted in every way, but without sin. Well, that includes then he wasn't actually tempted in the way that we think of temptation. He was tested. And so in the Lord's Prayer, there are people who've taken that, lead us not into temptation, what it says in James, that God does not tempt anyone. So they propose time of trial, deliver us from the time of trial, rather than temptation. I think it just creates other problems. It's just the problem for fallen creatures who have sin in them to imagine a temptation that would be a trial and not actually tempt us, because we always are tempted.
So
But we're praying to be delivered from that because we can't resist it. That's why we're praying for it.
So what about Eve then, who had no sin in her?
You're asking me to explain originally the flood. She was deceived. She did not have a sinful nature before sin happened. She was deceived. That's the biblical account. She was not tempted. She was tried by the devil and deceived by the devil, and she fell. But she wasn't tempted in the sense that her nature, the badness in her nature, somehow loomed up. She didn't have any. It's hard to imagine. But in the same way that Jesus succeeded. He was tried but not tempted. She was also tried and failed, and so did Adam. Because otherwise, she had no way of resisting the temptation or the trial. She was predisposed to it, had no choice. And the Bible, she couldn't be condemned then. She was, to use Milton's words, she was sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Sufficient. She could have stood. So it was a real rebellion. She was rightly and justly condemned. And with her, mankind. So the Lord of the Rings then is it's this legendarium with I think vast scope and power, and it includes not only chronology and cosmology and geography. So there are books or there are maps included in editions. There's various nomenclature. There are multiple languages, including 2 Elven languages that Tolkien claims to discover. He doesn't create them. They're there, and he sort of there they are. So they're called Quenya and Sindarin. All of these things are part of the beauty and complexity of the work, and it's so grand that most people can't grasp it. Actually, the people that are the most interesting on it are the real Tolkien. I'm hugely interested in Tolkien, but I have never learned Quenya. But there are people who have and speak it, which I find extraordinary. And it goes a little too far for me. Okay. But I don't really want to mock it, because I think there are, if you're going to be doing something sort of weird, and this is one of the better things, I guess. I'm still not going to do it. But it has great power, and it also has an implicit Christianity. But it's implicit. It's not explicit. And it's not even allegorical, according to Tolkien. And I'm going to come to that before I finish. I'm going to make sure that I do finish, as I say. But there are charges against it, of various sorts. And you can read about them, and they've been there from the beginning, by the way. One of the charges is that the evil it presents isn't particularly potent. I'll talk about that more in a subsequent talk when I talk about Tolkien's view on evil. We're going to have a whole lecture on that subject, because I think it's important. But the evil as it is presented seems not to have much. It's presented, it's very scary. But then when there's an actual confrontation, where are the big battles? Never mind the movies where they go on for half an hour, 45 minutes, and it's just, arrows going through people and heads chopped off and arms chopped off. And read the battle scenes in the books. They're short, and they're not very bloody. In fact, they barely seem to happen. The evil seems to sort of melt away. The 9 riders were scary as all get up. Terrifying. Again, they seem to be almost shadowy figures. The portrait of evil, because it all hinges between a battle between good and evil of sorts, but evil doesn't seem particularly potent. Or it's more of a psychological thing. It has a grip on the good characters, but it doesn't really have a physical incarnation in evil characters. Or if it does, again, they melt away. So, for instance, it's presented in the movie, The Lord of the Rings, when the Ring of Power is actually destroyed, the army that is surrounding Aragorn and his little host just suddenly vanishes. Just gone. They run away, disappear. What a weird, there's no battle then. It's over. That's a strange presentation of evil. But that's Tolkien's presentation. So that the critique that evil doesn't seem particularly potent for all of the claims of potency. That's one of the charges. Another charge is that he's created a rural world which is pretty irrelevant to a modern urban environment, increasingly urban environment. Most people don't identify with the little village life in rural England or the Shire. It presents an ancient world where civilization lies or rather it doesn't. It suggests that the cities are almost bad places and the rural places are the good places. So that's the second critique. The third is that it's there's no, if you want to say it's a Christian epic or a Christian story, where's the Christianity in it? There's not even a reference to God in it. There's no praying. There's no acts of worship. The characters don't refer to God. There's no gospel. There's no formal religion. There are no priests. There's no temples. There's no sacrifices of any sort. So in what sense can this possibly be a Christian story? There's a couple instances like Sam and Frodo call out to Elbereth, O Elbereth Gilfonia, when they're in the lair of Shelob and so forth, right? And they hold the Star of Elendil up, right? But those are very few and far between, and what's going on there remains a little puzzling. And those are two small to really count this a particularly Christian story. A third critique is that or a fourth is that it's children's literature. It's kiddie lit. Those are critiques, and they're critiques that might rightly be charged against it, or seem to be, as not really reflecting a Christian vision at all. And I will add to that most people, when they read The Lord of the Rings, enjoy it and have no idea that the author was a Christian. Didn't even know. And when they're told, will shrug their shoulders, say, so I like it, and it's irrelevant. But most Christians that I've met will say that it was one of the most profound works that strengthened their faith and their convictions. So how do you account for that? I might be wrong, but I don't think so. That's many people's experience. But that will include Christians and people who don't call themselves Christians. And again, Tolkien is considered the author of the century. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. In 1997, when I was living in the UK, and the academics went crazy, and the cultural elite went crazy, and I can talk more about that, but there's a good account of it. I don't have it with me. Okay, by Pierce, in the first chapter of his book, Tolkien, A Literary Biography, Man or Myth, talks about the reception in his day, not the original reception, but in 1997, when these polls of the British public were published, who's the author of the century? Tolkien. The literary establishment goes nuts. So do the educators, because the educators don't put Lord of the Rings on the syllabus. He's not in schools. It's extraordinary. It's very difficult, by the way, in an age when people don't read books, for an author who isn't part of the compulsory curriculum for every child to be the favorite of children and adults. That's not an easy thing to do. It's totally swimming against the stream. Yes?
What I thought was hilarious about that was, first they called it the Book of the Century, and he swept that. They were scandalized, so they did a second contest and called it the Book of the Millennium.
Right.
And he swept that.
That might have been just a backlash at that point. Who knows?
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
They were scandalized again.
Yeah. Well, I'm slightly scandalized at that. The second one, I'm not sure what the author of the Millennium, but Century, I can live with that. But the Millennium, oh, come on. Tolkien himself's not going to agree with that. He'd be outraged, I think. but that he ought to be read, and that he plainly moves people in ways that they can't even describe, to the point where he is people's favorite author. And I don't know how many people I know who would say that. There's something there. Well, what is it then? Because it's not just children's literature, because adults enjoy it as much as children do. And that's, to me, a good test of good children's literature, by the way, is if I can enjoy it as an adult, it's a good kid's book. If I can't, it's probably not, actually. Like, I'm not sure about the Cat in the Hat. Not sure. I liked it as a kid, but I'm not. Got my questions about the Cat in the Hat as great literature or even good children's lit. Not sure.
The movie was disturbing.
Yeah. Then there's a lot of that. So to respond to that just very briefly, it's undeniable, I think, that there are aspects of that at least have some correspondence to Christianity in them. So there's the lembus bread, which seems a lot like communion, or the Eucharist, to use a Catholic or Anglican term. The real presence of Christ in the bread, but here there is no Christ. It's just a bread that has a strange virtue in it that nourishes, even though there's not much there. There's something that strengthens not the body, but more the spirit, the moral nature of the characters. I'll talk about the moral nature of the characters at length, by the way. It's one of the more interesting aspects of the whole story. But the lembus bread is like that. This is a little wafer, and yet this is the body of Christ. How does that work? It has to be more than a mere symbol. There's no formal religion. Why does he do this then? Why is there no formal religion if Tolkien will tell us that his Catholicism is the most important aspect of his identity, even as an author? How come? Short answer is that he does so in order that we might see Christianity reflected more clearly, even if it's indirectly. Not less clearly, more clearly. There's a full-fledged theology, as I say, in the Silmarillion. It's there it is. It's latent in the Lord of the Rings. And I quote here in his letters, the religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. That's Tolkien's own words. So the argument is, and has been made, that the reason people feel that this is almost a religious text for them is that it's more Christian for not being overt in its Christianity. This, in fact, might be a charge that he holds against Lewis. It's a little bit too overt. And it's less effective for that. I think we can debate that, but that would probably be the charge. Tolkien is not less convicted about his Christian faith. He thinks that it will be more powerfully expressed if it's not so patent. He thinks that it will violate the integrity of his art to make it more explicit because of the time scheme and the mythological context. It would be forcing a template on his work that would make it seem ridiculous. Yes?
I always wondered if he didn't explicitly have faith be such a big part of the universe because it was implied that there was no other religion, no other.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
This is the only one.
There's one.
Even the bad guys know that this is the truth.
Yes. Correct. So it's absolutely certain. It's so certain that everyone assumes it. It's the natural law. It's the Tao. It's everywhere. And everyone affirms that it is or rebels against it. Those who rebelled against it are contradicting the God who wrote that into the cosmos. So I'm going to write a book on this topic, by the way. I think the Tao is the central, centrally important thing to understand in Lewis and Tolkien, and makes for the apologetic power that it has. But he thinks it will violate the integrity of good art and the faithfulness of his witness if he makes his Christianity more patent. Note that Jesus discloses himself in time and space through his people Israel and his son Jesus. Not because they're a time-bound manifestation of a timeless nature, but because there's no other way in which God can truly identify himself except through their story. So he has to tell a story. It's important for him to tell the story and be true to the terms of the story that he's telling. But note that it's sub-creation. His story will be an echo, and a dim echo at that, of the story of God revealed in Scripture. Now, if you want to see I didn't get you to read this, but in the I need to finish here. In the book I did not get you to read, his essay on Beowulf called "The Monsters and the Critics." He talks about, and he argues, and the technique of the Beowulf poet is Tolkien's own technique, by the way. So it's important in that sense. But he argues that this poem, probably from the 7th century, Anglo-Saxon, was written by an anonymous Christian, probably a monk. He thinks that the author is Christian. And that the author faithfully narrates the legend of Beowulf's battles against Grendel, his mother, and then finally the dragon. And then in the end kills Beowulf as well. But he sought to preserve the brutality of the pagan world without apology, and the hopelessness in it, and the despair in it. So if you read Beowulf, there are references to things that show a clear knowledge of Christianity. There's an account of Cain, right? So it's clear that the author must have an awareness of Scripture. But he presents it as men going down to death without hope of victory. So this catastrophic tale. So Beowulf kills the dragon, but then leaves his land without a king, undefended. And there are a lot of enemies out there. So it ends with the great victory over the 3 monsters, including the dragon at the end, but there's no king left to protect the kingdom. And imminent doom is coming then. Beowulf ends with very dark, actually. And even with some questions about whether Beowulf ought to have fought the dragon and sacrificed his own life. Some questions by the narrator of Beowulf. And so there is men with courage, and this is from The Monster and the Critics, I'll read this. Men with courage, as their stay went forward to that battle with the hostile world and the offspring of the dark, which ends for all, even the kings and champions, in defeat. That's the portrait. The Lord of the Rings ends with defeat and not with victory. I don't think if you watch the movie you would never know that. But Frodo does not complete the quest. The ring is destroyed, but evil perdures. The Shire is scoured and burnt to the ground. The elves leave Middle-earth. So does Gandalf. Has evil gone away? No. Well, then who's going to defend it? And Gandalf himself, the wise Gandalf, says that evil will one day win. That's what he says. So there's a darkness there which fits with the account of Beowulf, and yet there's Christianity woven into it. Let me talk about that finally on the issue of allegory, and then we'll as the course progresses the next few weeks, we'll talk about how the Christianity is interwoven into the characters as the most important aspect of it. I mean, when I say the characters, I mean well, literally, their moral character. In the foreword to the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien wrote, I cordially, and I quote, I cordially dislike allegory in all of its manifestations, and always have done, since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. He denied that he was writing allegory when he wrote The Lord of the Rings. Said it was not an allegory. Most people find this shocking and troubling. By the way, Lewis said the same thing about his works. I'm not writing an allegory. And everyone else is saying, yes, you are. And are angry about it. I've said it in public. And so I was invited at Bayview Glen many years ago to talk about not The Lord of the Rings, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I said that Aslan was not an allegory for Jesus. And the pastor's wife was furious with me. She's really mad. And not having that guy back again. Yeah. Yes?
I honestly think that Lewis is lying.
He's lying.
I think he's lying.
Excellent. Excellent. So he's promoting truth by lying.
Aslan straight up says, you know me by another name.
Sure. Okay. So okay, just so let me explain. So let me explain. Of course you're confused by it because you can see the obvious connection, right?
No, I'm confused because I never thought it was allegory, so I'm confused that people think that.
Oh, okay, good for you. Tolkien and so what would the allegory be of then? And so they'll say it's of World War II when he wrote it. So by that account, the ring would be a nuclear weapon. And Sauron and his enemies would obviously be the Nazis, and the Rohan, Gondor, and the Shire would be the Allied powers, and Mordor the Axis powers and the battle, etc. So it's a sort of a clear. Okay, no. Okay, but then Christian. So is Sauron Satan? Who is Sauron? Who does he represent? Because actually, if you read the Silmarillion, it's clear that Sauron is not even the most wicked of all of. Okay, so Melkor is Satan, but
I mean, he's the most wicked.
no. Well, hold on. You said it's an allegory. If in an allegory, you have to have equal signs.
No, Lewis, not Tolkien.
Oh, Lewis. Okay, so
He's telling the truth. Lewis is a liar.
excellent. Excellent. Okay, excellent. I love the pushback. Both men think that they do not write allegories, despite what Jaden says about these two liars, or one liar. Sorry, it's just Lewis who's a liar. Yeah.
A nice liar.
A nice liar. There's a great quotation from Tolkien here, and Lewis will ascribe to this as well. Here's the quote. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory. But the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purposed domination of the author. An allegory is being imposed by the author, and there's no freedom for the reader to interpret it at all. Tolkien is against coercion. He wants freedom. He thinks that in order to, and there's an apologetic intent here, same with Lewis, he wants to draw people freely to love God. Not to say this is, and you have no choice. And remember, he thought this is largely in Tolkien, in Lewis's work, this is children's literature. I'm not talking about, by the way, about the Narnia Chronicles. That's outside the scope of the course per se. We'd have to talk about how Lewis succeeds or fails in this. But what they mean by these things is applicability. So it applies. So Aragorn could be a type of Jesus because he's the king, and Gandalf could be we could apply that to Jesus because he's our effectual priest, high priest, or prophet. And Frodo might be the suffering servant. Right? So we could apply those things, but it's not for Tolkien and for Lewis. If we're going to use the word allegory, and maybe say that this is just because they're being too tight with language, that when they say it's not allegory, that's because they have a very, very stark understanding of what allegory is, and it is exact correspondence. Exact correspondence. So this equals that, and nothing else. There's an equal sign there. And they don't want to use it because they don't want to coerce their readers. They think it defeats the purpose of fiction to coerce people into things. That's what propaganda does. We want you to freely assent to it. So there's a latitude there, and so it's implicit, but the implicit approach to it is the very way in which they appeal to their readers who are under terrific coercion of propaganda in their day. That it appeals to people. They smell the fresh sea air in both Lewis and Tolkien's work. There's delight in it, and you can live in it and rejoice in it without being forced to do anything. We've run out of time.